Have you checked the children? Your little master.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known on this level of the tower as Jaime and Fuego, and if you please, you join me here for a bit of very special palaver on Hail! Stephen King. That's Reezy, y'all. Obviously, bienvenidos, and welcome to the horror show. And in years past here on Hail to Stephen King, there was a time when I was double downing on the episodes. We had every terrifying Tuesday and every spectacular Saturday. And yes, it has been a one episode a week kind of thing for about a year or so now. But you get a special edition of my beloved show that honors my favorite author, El Rey, Mr. Sai King. And that is because today is, as I have said before, the equivalent of Christmas morning for myself, a longtime constant reader who has done everything in the published chronological order. If you were new to this program and just stumbling upon this review of his latest, took me about 7 years to start with Carrie and go through everything as it was published, and it was an amazingly gratifying, satisfying journey. And since then, the last few releases, If It Bleeds, Institute, stuff like that, I've just been reading as they have been released. And today, we have that Christmas morning equivalent. None other than Later. Later. Yep, that's right. Check you later, check you later. And I basically just finished this book here on day of release. I was actually, so this was pre-ordered, and I was like, man, when is it going to come? When is it going to come? And I like to give a read and give a listen when I'm doing like the book of the month for the Facebook group and things of that nature. But yeah, since last night at midnight Pacific time, I thought I was going to get it mountain time here in the deadly desert of Arizona. Unfortunately, that did not transpire, so I had to wait till 1 o'clock my time, because California and the West Coast is an hour behind me, for me to actually start the audiobook of this latest from Hard Case Crime. And so Sai King has done 2 previous releases with this particular publisher, which is separate from his Simon & Schuster, I believe, are the ones who publish his main stuff, like the aforementioned If It Bleeds, Institute, Outsider, stuff like that. But previously, he had started out with The Colorado Kid, and then he also did Joyland, of which there is an excerpt of Joyland at the end of this book. And just like those other 2 releases, Colorado Kid significantly smaller in scale and in length. Joyland a little bit longer, but yeah, this one is, I believe, like 248. So this was a very quick read. I listened to a good chunk of it last night, and then finished it up with the reading and stuff today over the course of the morning. And yeah, I have to say that whereas Colorado Kid was, and this is going to be non-spoiler, however, I am going to give a forewarning here near the end of the review when I give just some final, like, spoilery sort of thoughts. This is not going to be a book of the month because of the fact that with just 248 in paperback form, I kind of don't necessarily see it as being something that could be expanded upon for like an hour to an hour and a half for the live book of the month. But if you guys are watching this and you want like a full-on deep dive spoiler review live, we'll see if we can get it done. But just to remind, this upcoming Saturday, there is still Dreamcatcher, which for its 20th anniversary is the book of the month here on the Saturday, which is approaching, and that will be a live show. But yeah, so whereas Colorado Kid, pretty much very grounded, very much, you know, of this world and not getting super naturally or anything like that, there is a essence of that to Joyland as far as like a ghostly sort of presence. But you figure out pretty much right off the bat in Later that this is going just right into that otherworldliness pretty much instantly. And I mean, it's even as we read the book, as far as the description goes here in the back, sometimes growing up means facing your demons. And it is described as the son of a struggling single mother. Jaime Conklin just wants an ordinary childhood, but Jaime is no ordinary child. Born with an unnatural ability, his mom urges him to keep secret. Jaime can see what no one else can see and learn what no one else can learn, but the cost of using his ability is higher than Jaime can imagine, as he discovers when an NYPD detective draws him into the pursuit of a killer who has threatened to strike from beyond the grave. So that's just a very, very broad description, and I mean, Jamie Morton is one of my personal favorite Sidekick characters from Revival, and obviously Jamie DeCurry is another side character, buddy of Roland's from the Tower stuff. But yeah, to have another character named Jamie, and especially one that is of the adolescent variety and discovers this ability at a very young age. Really the most significant encounter is when he's in preschool and he's driving around with his mother past Central Park, and he sees that there has been this bicycle accident, this older guy, and his body is covered up, you know, his head and everything, which is all covered in blood and mangled and messed up and stuff. But Jamie sees the like deceased man, you know, the apparition, the ghost, right beside him, and his face is like kind of mangled in half, and you can see bone, and it's just really goopy and grisly and nasty. And so that's like the first really prolific incident that he relates to his mother. His mother is scared and wonders if it's actually true or not, but, you know, it's downplayed and not talked about for a number of years until, you know, a few later, when I think he's like, and later is like, the term comes up tons and tons of times in this book. And I actually want to just read the little opening bit here, because there is like a little preface that starts out. Oh, also there's an interesting quote from Michael Landon, of all people. Rest peacefully. There are only so many tomorrows. And I presume that's probably from Heaven Can Wait, I think was the show he was on, where I think he was like a spirit, like a ghost basically, that just hadn't gone up to heaven just yet. He was trying to help stuff out here. I saw maybe a few episodes in syndication when I was a kid, but so this is the only bit, it's the very beginning of the book, okay? Just one page, couple paragraphs, so here you go. I don't like to start with an apology. There's probably even a rule against it, like never ending a sentence with a preposition. But after reading over the 30 pages I've written so far, I feel like I have to. It's about a certain word I keep using. I learned a lot of 4-letter words from my mother and used them from an early age, as you will find out. But this is one with 5 letters. The word is later, as in later on, later I found out, and it was only later that I realized. I know it's repetitive, but I had no choice, because my story starts when I still believed in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy, although even at 6 I had my doubts. I'm 22 now, which makes this later, right? I suppose when I'm in my 40s, always assuming I make it that far, I'll look back on what I thought I understood at 22 and realize there was a lot I didn't get at all. There's always a later, I know that now, at least until we die. Then I guess it's all before that. My name is Jaime Conklin, and once upon a time I drew a Thanksgiving turkey that I thought was the absolute cat's ass. Later, and not much later, I found out it was more like the stuff that comes out of the cat's ass. Sometimes the truth really sucks. I think this is a horror story. Check it out. And that very personal nature with which King addresses it, because it is being written by a supposed 22-year-old, there's lots of slang like check it out, and, you know, just that, you know, I made that ghost my bitch, you know, stuff like that. The terminology and the way that this Jamie character puts the narrative together of his experiences, you know, with otherworldly presence in his adolescence, it's like the prose flows. This is a very accessible King book, and just to give overall thoughts, I enjoyed it immensely. You know, but then again, similar to my buddy Mike Kearns from Mike's Book Reviews, he actually said that we were conversing, or at least I saw him comment on my photo of the audiobook earlier today when I was still in the midst of this. He was like, yeah, I went in with low expectations, and, you know, I'm actually very pleasantly surprised. I was much the same, you know, because I was like, oh, it's about another gifted kid. Like, okay, you know, we've obviously seen this numerous times, whether, you know, I mean, everyone, most notably Danny Torrance, obviously, but, you know, various other gifted youngsters, you know, whether, you know, I mean, even Jack Sawyer to a degree, and, you know, Jake Chambers, and, you know, various others. But, so with that in mind, I was like, okay, this is going to be another one of those, like, you know, buy the books, no pun intended, sort of situation. But I think more so than anything, one of the bits that, even though there's a lot of familiarity to this Stephen King story, he brings in enough new stuff from when the crime aspect finally starts to come into play, which does take a little bit of time, and I'll get to it momentarily, but also in the fact that he sets it in New York City, setting all too often, and the fact that so much of his material takes place in Maine. Anytime he goes elsewhere, whether it's Doomakey being down in Florida, whether it's obviously The Shining, even though I have my qualms with that book, you know, being in Colorado, various other places that he, you know, even like Desperation being in New Mexico, or excuse me, not New Mexico, Oh, goodness, Nevada. Anyway, long story short, I am a lot more compelled when King alters his setting and, in my estimation, kind of gets a little out of that comfort zone. And so Jaime, our main kid here, he is the son of a literary agent. That's what his mother does. She flogging the product, as she calls it, basically reading the manuscripts and trying to pimp that shizzle out and, just get them distributed, get her 15%, all that jazz. And he has no idea who his father is. It is a mystery that is not revealed until the end of the book. And I did find that a little dissatisfying. I'll get to that once I give some spoilery thoughts at the very end. But yeah, so he has seen dead people since he could remember, essentially. And of course, who could not say, the Sixth Sense comparisons? Well, King pretty much breaks the fourth wall, gets meta to a degree, and even says, as Jaime is writing this in the first person, obviously, He's like, yeah, man, it's, I see dead people, but it's nothing like that Bruce Willis movie. So at least, people can draw their comparisons all they want. At least King covers his ass a little bit and addresses it. So I give him credit in that regard. But yeah, just the flashback to the Central Park sequence where, Jaime's mother really for the first time just gets a vibe of that. But then there isn't another incident until a few years later, and that is essentially the incident that starts the book off, because the Central Park instance is a flashback of sorts. And that's because a good friend of him and his mother, just like, I believe lives in the same building, if I remember correctly, but Mr. Beckett. And Mr. Beckett, Professor Beckett, to be fair, is a retired guy from NYU, and his wife just passes suddenly from an embolism in her brain. And the way King so nonchalantly writes this scene initially, because Jaime and his mother, they go to, give some support and comfort to Mr. Beckett, and he's like smoking a cigarette, and Jaime's never seen him smoke a cigarette, and so he's all tripped out seeing that and whatnot. But obviously he identifies and realizes it's a special circumstance and, just cuts some slack in that regard. But very nonchalantly, King mentions that Mrs. Beckett is there. And at first, as I was going through the prose, and even when I was listening late last night, it didn't click initially until, you realize the fact that he's like, oh man, I need to, just implement my manners, which in turn is like, not to, King mentioned some weird things like not pulling out your willy in front of other people and, manners at the dinner table and whatnot, but also that it entails not talking to dead people when you were around the living. And the way King describes Jaime's impression of those who have not passed on just yet, I really enjoyed. I found it fascinating and kind of darkly funny to a degree, because Mrs. Beckett makes fun of the, when you're in school, like grade school, obviously at a very young age, and I'm sure just about everybody has done this, where you trace your hand and then you turn your thumb into the head of the turkey and then your fingers are the feathers of the turkey. So Jaime has this green turkey that he has made the day of Mrs. Beckett's death, and her ghost starts like kind of talking shit to him, which is really funny. She's like, turkeys aren't green, blah, blah, blah. You're no Rembrandt. And so that's it. It's darkly funny. And yeah, so that's where the way he even describes it further is the fact that, these ghosts are basically in the clothes that they have on when they die, so they remain in those until they finally cross over, and it usually takes a couple days. And so, within like 3 to 4 days, maybe 5 tops, they finally pass on to the next stage of their soul's existence, and that's when, he can no longer see them. But he does also say that the dead talk to him, and yet they always have to tell the truth. It's like some sort of stipulation that, they cannot deceive somebody like him, a living person who can in fact see them. And so I thought that was kind of fascinating. And then also the fact that they can talk, but King describes through Jaime the fact that as they get closer to that departure to the next plane of existence for themselves, when they're in this little bit of limbo, like they can still talk, but it's like their voices become quieter and more muffled. As he describes with a really great metaphor, he's like, it's almost like when you turn down the radio and you can only faintly hear it. So he describes the communication that he is able to do with the dead responding to him as such, which I found really fascinating. And so, yeah, that's where there is a wedding band and an engagement ring that is missing, and so Mr. Beckett, Professor Beckett, is freaking out because his wife used to always take these off when she was like putting this weird like face wash, cream, whatever sort of stuff on her body. And so both of those rings are missing, and Jaime decides to just ask Mrs. Beckett, since she's still hanging around, where they are. And when him and his mother come back later with Chinese for dinner, they randomly discover it, and that's where suddenly his mom is reminded of the Central Park situation, and she's just like, damn, it didn't go away, did it, kid? And so that's where the story really starts to take off, is after just that reminder when he's 6 years old that he does still possess this power, and his mom is just like, well, damn, okay, I guess this is something we are going to have to continue to deal with. So it's fascinating in that regard, and then time just starts to speed along, and this is where I can make the Jaime Morton comparison with Revival. It doesn't go as far into Jaime's life as far as like spanning multiple decades, but we do go from when he's 6 and we just age along with him over the years, including the 2008-2009 economic downturn that screws his mother over. His mother, as a literary agent, was initially working with her brother Harry, but Harry has early onset Alzheimer's, and so she ends up basically taking over the company for him. He's thrown into a home and needs constant care, which is obviously incredibly depressing, having, you know, loved ones and also friends with loved ones who have experienced this sort of thing coming on much earlier in life than you typically see. And yeah, so that's a thing. But as the time goes through, a bunch of investments that Jaime's uncle Harry was so positive were going to be great turn out to be these friggin' Ponzi schemes. And so him and his mother, they end up losing a ton of money, and this posh apartment that they have, to like practically overlooking Central Park, if I remember correctly, they have to downscale. They sell the Range Rover, they move to a much smaller place, and you know, they do weather the storm eventually, but over the course of that time, Jaime's mother gets involved with a NYPD detective by the name of Liz, and it becomes very evident very quickly that she is rather flawed, and it causes some friction in the relationship, and that's where I don't want to really get too into any of that until like the spoilery stuff starts to, once I give the forewarning about that. But Liz and her dynamic with both Jaime and with Jaime's mother, it's a very intriguing one, especially when you overhear the fact that Jaime's mother is arguing with, you know, Liz about the fact that, you know, everything from role of law enforcement to, you know, profiling of, you know, people of color and stuff like that. So you can very much tell the type of character that she is, and her true colors become more apparent as the narrative goes along. But this is where, so Jaime's power is eventually needed and just kind of tapped to aid in certain precarious situations. And this is where I have to really dance around it because I don't want to spoil things. But despite the fact that Jaime's mother had proclaimed to him countless times that you need to keep this secret of yours under wraps, do not tell anybody, and it was supposed to be just between the two of them. But about as far as I can go without getting into super spoilery territory is the fact that she tells her lady friend, and in turn, his abilities are needed for just some. So there's a cash cow of sorts that Jaime's mother has, and it's this guy by the name of Regis. I'm trying to remember his first name, but that doesn't matter. Regis basically is her cash cow because of the fact that he has a very popular series of these, like, you know, fantasy, adventure, horror, like almost like adult erotic kind of novels. It's described by Jaime at one particular point as 50 Shades of Roanoke, and they're all about that, you know, that colony that disappeared, Croatoan, all that stuff. I mean, all kinds of different, you know, literary people, whether for print or for television or film, have tackled this. I mean, everything from Supernatural to, you know, there was a whole season of American Horror Story that tied in with it. It's always a story that's fascinated me as well. So the fact that Jamie's mother's cash cow is basically this guy who has written a series of 9 different books all about Roanoke that are super kinky and super bloody, like, just creatures in the swamp and 3-ways and all kinds of different shit. I mean, it's funny how Jamie talks about the fact that he learned about sex by stealing the Regis books and reading them on his own. And so when we join the story around the time that Professor Beckett's wife passes suddenly, that's about the time that all the economic downturn stuff goes into play, and Jamie's mom thinks that she's going to be just fine with just clinging to the fact that this guy is going to continue producing. He's working on his swan song to the Roanoke series, the finale to his major opus, and then something happens that renders him unable to write. And that's where Jamie kind of comes into play without spoiling stuff. And so this is once again where I have to just really, really dance around. But Ghost Maiden of Roanoke is the manuscript that Jamie's mother is looking at before this incident goes down with Regis the writer. But a couple quotes from this that I really liked, and something that Jamie says early on. He says, "When the fickle finger of fate points at you, all roads lead to the same place." And that's almost like that, you can't escape your destiny, or where, these otherworldly forces, of God or destiny or whatever are kind of pushing you towards. I thought that was a really cool line from King. And, oh goodness, what else? And he does mention quite a few times, I think this is a horror story, and he breaks that fourth wall and gets a little meta constantly in his writing, in the fact that he's just like, yeah, this is a horror story, y'all. Do you not believe me? And he calls attention to it throughout the narrative quite a few times. What else? We already mentioned the Alzheimer's stuff, economic downturn, all that. So that relationship with Liz, which is the police officer, and with Jamie's mom, it encounters some difficulties, and it's right around the same time that, as you hear about on the back of the book, so this isn't super spoilery, that there is this gentleman by the name of Thumper. That is his nickname. And he's basically like a George Metesky, the Mad Bomber, which was a guy who was at work in New York, I believe, for a number of years. Shout out to my former bandmate, Chris Payne, and his podcast, which is called Profiling Pain. If you guys are into true crime sort of stuff, I was the producer for the first season of that show and his co-host until he relocated to Casa Grande. And I have to say, we did a very intriguing series of episodes all about none other than Mr. Metesky, that Mad Bomber. And so that is who this guy Thumper is compared to by Liz. He had been working from 1996 until 2009, and so yeah, we are talking that's like 12 years or 17 years, something like that. Anyway, my math is absolutely awful, but so this guy, whose real name is Kenneth Terrio, basically the consultation that is mentioned here on the back of the NYPD detective, it is in fact the girlfriend of Jamie's mother, and she's like, we have to figure out where this guy has laid some bombs, and so he has gone on to the next level, and so they're trying to track him down to see if he can give some information about where some of these bombs are, because he had been just messing with people, blowing things up here and there all over that extensive period of time, and just kind of toying with them, so to speak. But then when a telephone booth is blown up and there is the first loss of life as opposed to maiming and injury, that's where the investigation really ramps up, and that's where just Liz sees the importance of bringing Jamie into the equation with hopes of assistance. And so that's really about as far as I can go into this story. King has a few other really choice lines that I like. There's nothing like having a mother around when you're thinking of scary shit. I thought that was cool because, that was when he was remembering the guy with the split face, the older bicycler that he saw at Central Park. Obviously, Thumper, he has this, how do you like my work, more to come. So he's taunting law enforcement throughout. And there are some interesting references to, Jamie thinks about Shawshank Prison. At one particular point, he also utters a phrase I found intriguing where he says the worst of growing up is how it shuts you up. And in the fact that that ties in with the loss of imagination that King mentions a few different times in this book, where it's like, okay, yeah, the reason adults don't believe in ghosts and otherworldly presence like that is because when they're kids, they believe in, the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. And as time goes on, they realize that that shit is fake. And so for that reason, when you grow up, you start to shut up because you basically close your mind off to the possibility of those things beyond your visibility, your grasp, your comprehension, all that different stuff. And that's kind of what later entails, is like later in life you shut yourself up, you close yourself off, sort of thing. And despite the ambiguity of the title, and I mean maybe some people would scoff at that, the fact that King expands upon the relevance of such a simple word, I found really riveting. And this book especially, once it, because it is that interesting combination of the otherworldly with the fact that he can see these people before they pass on and stuff. And not all of them are nice, and as you would probably expect, if you have a Mad Bomber type who is no longer in this level of existence, he's probably not going to be the nicest guy, when you see him, on the other side. And also, whereas, Jaime sees regular people who die and aren't massively disfigured, when he does see them, like the girl on the subway who has, sliced her wrists open and stuff, or the aforementioned, guy who crashes and burns and has his face, messed up at Central Park when he dies, that's the stuff that really disturbs him much more so than just the regular conversating with them, just like dead people, but of the more normal within their appearance. So when the hard case crime stuff does come into town, come into tow and into town and stuff here, I did like it. There is really, despite a less than 250 paperback length, nonetheless, I was really impressed with this book. I liked it very, very much, and granted, as I mentioned earlier, there is similarities to previous King work here and there, most notably when Jaime strikes up a friendship with Professor Beckett, and the fact that, yes, we've seen whether, even as recently as Mr. Harrigan's Phone, or obviously, Brodigan and, oh goodness, why can't I think of Garfield, in Hearts in Atlantis, the low men, obviously, in the yellow coats, that story specifically. I'm always endeared with the aging elderly man striking up a friendship, with the young boy, especially one that doesn't have a father in his life, which is why the pairing and the mentorship and the friendship and just the kind connection makes sense. King returns to it a lot, I presume because of the fact that he didn't have his father in his life. And it's also why he would write a line like, there's nothing like your mother when you're thinking about scary shit. He writes, and shout out to Mike Kearns once again, man, because of the fact that, as I'm sure you will see with this dude and various others from, all my friends and, fellow constant readers and members of the Hail Ka-Tet and anybody else who may come upon this, King writes adolescence and just the maturing process and the loss of innocence and stuff like that, albeit he usually has the loss of innocence come about with otherworldly presence and stuff, but nonetheless, he writes Jaime with such conviction and yet such just fun fascination, and also with a little bit of audacity, as I will get to here as I shift into spoilers here in just a moment. But it's really very much like when you encounter a King book that just really resonates with you, like this one did for me. And I think the fact that I was a young boy, of that just investigative, filled with intrigue once, obviously, and I like to think of knowledge as like opening a door to a room with multiple more doors, because of the fact that you can never be satisfied, always leave your mind open and ready and willing and stuff like that for the amassing of knowledge, remain humble, all that good shizzle. But this book very much for me is like, it's like an old friend that you haven't seen in a while, and then when you're like, damn, it's been a hot minute, and after a little while, it's like not a day has passed. And that is the way that Later made me feel. And yes, we do have Billy Summers coming on, August 2nd, 3rd, something like that. So we do have another much lengthier King book that is coming later this year that I'm obviously extremely excited about. But I have to say, Later it just warmed my heart in every capacity that I could have desired. It's not going to be like top tier King, but this is very, very solid, dependable King, and it was better than I expected it to be. Now, as I round out this review, there's just a couple spoilers that I did want to make mention of. So if you have not read this, or if you don't want things to be spoiled, this is where I mentioned turning back. But so there's a lot of interesting references to Dracula in this, which I really dug the hell out of, especially as the pursuit goes down. But really, the thing that a lot of peeps in this probably don't want spoiled is the fact that this Thumper, this Terrio guy, he basically, as he realizes the jig is almost up and he is going to get caught, he decides to kill himself. So he blows his brains out, and that's where Jamie's mother's girlfriend at the time, Liz, because they end up splitting up, employs his help because she wants to find where this last bomb presumably is, this last big one that he had hinted at and stuff. And so they track down his ghost, and yet he's very standoffish. Jamie is kind of interrogating him, and he's like, where were those bombs, blah, blah, blah. And he's just like, I don't know, I don't want to tell you, sort of thing, because you have to tell the truth. So he can't lie, but he can at least try his damnedest to withhold the information. Does not succeed, ends up telling Jamie, and then Liz goes and averts this bombing at this grocery store. Shortly thereafter, you find out that Liz is in fact a crooked cop, and basically things end with this officer and with Jamie's mother, because of the fact that she is crooked enough that she is caught at the house, at the apartment that she is residing with them in, with like a couple pounds of cocaine. It's really just nuts. And so, yes, she is a dirty cop. They split up, but yes, as time goes on, you basically have her reassert herself into Jamie's life because her drug use, and we're talking 2-to-1 of coke and heroin with a dash of fentanyl. It is like the fact that her heart did not just like blast out of her friggin' chest is just nuts to me. I guess you work your way up to that sort of just insane debauchery, but nonetheless, so she goes off the deep end after the breakup, becomes much more entrenched in the drug peddling and drug smuggling and stuff like that, and she does get herself involved with this guy named Marsden, not Marston. Marston being the Marston house in Salem's Lot, obviously. And when I was reading this, I was like, Marsden. The fact that there is just that one letter, a D versus a T, and I'm like, any connection? Different turn of the wheel? Because this mansion, this like beautiful glass mansion that Liz basically kidnaps Jamie and takes him to in the third act of this, is this drug lord that she has been doing business with, and she describes it as the house that heroin built. And so this guy, basically, he is a sick son of a bitch, and he has like a panic room with all kinds of horrible stuff, pictures of, S&M and torture, snuff film sort of shit, and photographs, and so that's horrible. Liz kills this guy. She thought she had killed him already, or he was on the verge of death. She kills him, and she basically needs Jamie to get the information from his ghost about where he hid all of these pills that she wants to, take and sell off herself, obviously. So that's where our final confrontation, spoiler-wise, goes down. But there is an essence of predictability in what I saw kind of a mile away was going to happen with regards to this, because midway through the book, the ghost of Terrio, it becomes apparent that he is not a normal otherworldly presence, so to speak. He's not the ghost of a person. Now, the change transpires basically when Jamie extorts that information from him and makes him divulge where those bombs were in the grocery store. But as opposed to disappearing right away, like within a couple of days, he lingers, man. Do you have to let it linger? Do you have to? And so he just, over the course of a long period of time, I believe like months, if not years, he appears to Jamie, like typically in the distance, freaks the hell out of him, and this is where Jamie goes and consults with Professor Beckett in that friendship that I mentioned, and this is where we get our big tie-in to It. Yes, because of the fact that this entails the ritual of the Chud. I always said Chud because of the weird dots on the top, but at least the narrator of this, who I have to give a shout out to, Seth Numrick, because he actually read this pretty damn good, and his voicing of Terrio, because Terrio's like you hear about living people becoming like vessel for like demons and for stuff from other dimensions, these horrible otherworldly presences. But Jaime says at one particular point he'd never heard anything about somebody becoming the vessel when they're dead. So this is completely different territory. The fact that Terrio's vessel, even though it's in that essence of limbo, and the fact that it's it's his ghostly form. That ghostly form has been taken over by dead light. That's neither light nor dark. And I found that, so basically, we know that, whether it was Dandalo or whether it was even Tak and Desperation, there are these forces from these other dimensional world, whatever as you want to classify it as, that is of a similar just vein and just form of existence to, Pennywise, Bob Gray, just that other evil worldly presence. And so that is what we're dealing with here. And so Professor Beckett basically tells Jaime, he's like, look, you're going to have to, figuratively bite onto this dude's tongue and see, who comes out the victor. It's the same stalemate that, Big Bill had, in it, obviously, for all of those who know. And so, yeah, man, it's interesting how they bring in Deadlight and how they bring in that into it. And Jaime bests him. And Jaime gets a little big for his britches, and it's because of that youthful arrogance. And so after besting whatever Deadlight has taken over Terrio with this ritual of the Chud, which is done in this instance with a hug, and it's like a cosmic, seismic sort of event transpires, and all of the power is lost in the building. And so, big time stuff from this conflict. But as Jaime comes and boasts to Professor Beckett about besting Terrio or whatever, evil, demonic, otherworldly presence, whatever, has basically taken over his otherworldly shell. That's where Beckett's like, I don't know, you saying that, it's in your control at this particular point and that you're gonna haunt it now, I think you should slow your roll a little bit, kid, because of the fact that even the best trained tiger, will sometimes attack. Even the most loyal dog will occasionally turn and, bite its master, bite the hand that feeds. So, he's like, just keep that in mind that you were kind of playing with fire, so to speak, and yet it's relatively predictable that Terrio, this presence that has basically taken him over, and Jaime can summon it with a whistle, so to speak, that it's going to be used in vanquishing this just obsessed, crazy drug addict that Liz has become. And it's actually a pretty dope scene in the fact that when Jaime summons him at this drug lord's house, basically Liz is overcome with this just obsessive being drawn to this mirror. She looks into this mirror, and Jaime basically thinks he sees a hand come out. And so, with the assistance of this Terrio, this evil, otherworldly presence that has taken over that shell, that is how he is able to stop this crazy drug-addicted, former police officer, former love interest of his mother. And I must admit that I wasn't as satisfied with the fact that it wanted to go toe-to-toe with him again, and the way it's just kind of passingly okay, well, it's not going to happen now, but it's eventually going to happen, even if you're not, not going to do it right now, Jaime. It's that sort of inevitability. And that is after everything kind of, simmers down, and, Jaime's mother does not at least die of cancer within 6 months, Terrio was talking shit. And that's where, so you realize that whatever Terrio is at this particular point, it's not his human manifestation just as a ghost now. Something completely different, because it could lie about something like that. So it's something completely different, entirely. And so, yes, despite the predictability of how that pans out at the very end, I did smile where, King basically has Jaime say, books are a uniquely portable magic. I read that somewhere once. That really warmed my heart. And so this, yes, once again, there are similarities to certain things King has written before, but I really do feel like the Frankenstein assembly of, just this gifted kid, but approaching it in a different fashion with the whole detective aspect. Granted, maybe that does have some similarities to Johnny Smith from Dead Zone a little bit. Now granted, he wasn't seeing dead people, he just had premonitions, but nonetheless, so there are similarities to things King has done before. I even thought of the Paxcow, and just even Ellie being able to see this particular dead guy, and just being able to call him for information and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I was really impressed with this book. I enjoyed it quite the bit. And I also like the fact that the ending, it was a very similar ending in some ways to like Christine, for instance, where you know that that evil is out there somewhere and eventually it's going to come to get you. It's that sort of inevitability. So it's not like a super, cheery ending, although it does end with that term later, which I did enjoy. So right here at the very end, all I know, so I have no idea what I'm dealing with. All I know is that I must deal with it. I'll whistle for it. It will come. We will join in a mutual hug instead of a ritual tongue-biting thing. And then, well, then we'll see, won't we? Yes, we will. We'll see. Later. So I dug this book. If you guys have read it already, if you made it this far, I would hope you read it already as opposed to me spoiling the end of it and stuff for you. But yeah, I dug it, and I'm very curious to hear all of your thoughts on it. So I extend a grande gracias. I've been Jaime and Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube, where I do have my own personal YouTube channel that I just did the first bit of new content in about a month or so, and it was my reaction to the Golden Globe Awards that were this past Sunday, February 28th. I basically went through all of the different winners, gave my thoughts about whether it was deserved or not, and yeah, so if you're inclined, there's also all kinds of backlog reviews of films and comics, Star Wars stuff, you name it, all kinds of shizzle to geek out on. Obviously, a like, a share, a subscribe here on The Horror Show means a hell of a lot. Have you read this already? If you just made it through, just before I went into spoilers, tell me if you have not, if this review and assessment on my part left you more inclined to check it out. Once again, shout out to the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group. That is because this upcoming Saturday, March 6th, is going to be the live book review at 12 noon Eastern, 12 noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, and it's going to be all about Dreamcatcher, as I mentioned, that just recently celebrated its 20th anniversary, and that is where I am going to be unveiling the upcoming book of the month for March. And once again, it's not later just based on the page count and the fact that there is another book with a full-on anniversary that I felt more inclined to cover. So yes, if you want that further palaver, there's a little over 1,000 peeps on the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group. Just great kef and discussion there. Every Friday we do a Friday Freak Out where I let people talk about stuff beyond the Sai King family. But that's going to be the end of the proceedings for today. Happy reading. CRs across the globe. Later was a very enjoyable experience for me. So until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, sin amigos. Constant readers and viewers alike say thank you for spending a little bit of time with me here today. I hope we share more of that palaver sooner rather than later. And until then, remember to stay scared and read Stephen King. Yes, this one's pretty reasonable too. I mean, $14.99, but I think you can get it for like around $10 at various different places right now. So get to it.